Arknights, Genshin Impact, and Blue Archive. These are all three separate games that I've technically covered to some degree on my channel, and considering I've made community videos regarding each of them and occasional videos discussing the story, I want to take the time today to discuss which of these games is the best. Now outright, I know it's subjective, so please understand that what I say may be the best and my reasons why may be entirely different from yours, and your opinion and judgment can be entirely different from mine. With that being said, what I'm attempting and defining as the best game is going to come down to multiple things, one of which is the new player experience. When you walk into the game, when you step in, when you get involved, are you basically required to look up tier lists or to look up guides for everything? Or is the systems or are the abilities and everything else in the game intuitive enough to the point to where you can vaguely get a gist of what you're supposed to do and what works best by yourself? I feel like there is also something else to consider, which is the complexity of the systems. An example is, I feel like I can personally say this, Blue Archive's combat system isn't as complex in my opinion as something like Arknights or Genshin Impact. Both of these on the surface have very relatively simple complex systems, and as you go further along in the game, you can delve deeper into that combat system, delve deeper into what units do, how they work best with one another, and what specific or niche scenarios you can use, say, two specific units together and sort of mitigate the amount of units you have to deploy to get past, in Arknights at least. Whereas in Genshin Impact, you have a combat system that is relatively simple to master early on. You have the different weapon types and different element types, but as you go further on, you have things like resistance shred, you have things like artifact sets, which can really be useful for certain teams. You have elemental mastery, which boosts certain things. On top of that, you have things like energy recharge affecting them, the elemental damage bonus, and then you have the elemental reactions. Early on, I don't think many individuals will consider something like a taser team, or what elemental reaction to work with what character to an extent to where you can utilize a niche artifact set like instructors. So I think both of those two games, Arknights and Genshin, have arguably much more complex and deeper systems than they appear on the surface. Inherently, this does not mean that they're both better games. This just means they arguably have much more for you to learn about them, and you can theoretically improve your own ability to clear content via skill and via your knowledge of the mechanics. This is something that's inherently good in my opinion. Next up though, you also have the consideration of, okay, well, if you're starting out in a new game, what is there for you to do? And how quickly will you be gated by the stamina system, whether that be sanity in Arknights, or the stamina directly in Blue Archive, or the resin system in Genshin? An example of another game that does something very similar is Azur Lane. When you are starting out in Azur Lane, they give you all the oil on earth to the extent to where it's very difficult to run out. So your limit to what you can feasibly do as a new player, or in general, is how much do you want to spend? How much time are you willing to invest in? The stamina system in that game doesn't necessarily come into play too often, so you are very much in the clear to do what you desire without being gated super early. To that extent, I'd have to say that Genshin Impact performs the best in regards to that early on, and then that'd be followed by Blue Archive and finally Arknights. See, the thing is with the stamina system in Genshin, early on, you don't necessarily need to care or even acknowledge the resin system because you can't do much. You mainly focus on story quests and getting your adventure rank up, which is done by completing quest lines and commissions essentially. So early on, nothing you can do relies on your resin. Early game is essentially just farming up Mora and XP books or talent books because nothing is so dependent. You're not getting to the artifact farming stage. And early, especially like really early on, you can't even fight bosses to utilize your resin. So early game has nothing that really incentivizes you to focus on how much resin you have left. Blue Archive like Arknights, resets your stamina every time you level up, which is really good. But Blue Archive has the advantage of the cafe system, which slowly gives you an abundance of stamina that you can utilize each day. And at the same time, you also have the consideration of missions being entirely different from story. Because these two are separate things, if you can push past the missions, you unlock more story. If you unlock more story, you can do that, watch that, and in some ways participate in that later on whilst you wait for your stamina to refresh. Arknights has the disadvantage of everything being dependent on the stamina system or on the Originite Prime system and Sanity system, meaning that once you clear a quest or once you clear a mission, you get Originite Prime. That Originite Prime can be used to replenish your sanity, but not many individuals would want to do that. They want to save it for anything else. And you get a bunch of stuff to refresh it early on, but it doesn't change the fact that you are technically gated much harder early on, even if you do level up and it refreshes. I won't delve too deep into story. I've mentioned my thoughts on all of them. I think in my opinion, Blue Archive's the best, and I'd actually have to say that Arknights is the second best. Looking at and reevaluating Arknights' story, I'm thinking it's a lot. I prefer it over Genshin because Genshin has so much potential, but so much. The storytelling in Genshin Impact is awful. So ultimately, I'm going to have to say that Arknights is a much better storytelling experience. And finally, the community. I've mentioned numerous times before, I hate the Genshin community with a passion, or at least I hate Genshin Twitter and a lot of Genshin content creators. You know what? I just hate the Genshin community overall. So I'm going to have to rank Blue Archive and Arknights in the same tier. I'm going to actually put Arknights above Blue Archive, and my logic for that is, even though I said I like systems to be intuitive, when you are looking for a guide in Arknights, there's so much more content based around those guides. There's so much more content around explaining if the unit is good or bad, and people evaluating things compared to Blue Archive. So if you're a new player and you're lost and confused, you're much more likely to have a better time finding those resources in Arknights, in Arknights Discord, and Arknights Reddit, than something like Blue Archive. Genshin, although Genshin has a terrible community in terms of interaction to interaction, if you're looking for guides and help, Genshin has the best because there are so many individuals covering different styles of content, leaked and official. So finally, taking all of this into consideration, which of these games is the best? Which of these games has the best new player experience, and which one of these is an easier one to get into? Now, there's two things here. First, if you have time to develop and time to put into the game, I would say arguably the best one to get you to try out the gacha genre would unfortunately be Genshin Impact. And I say unfortunate because I know a lot of individuals are probably tired of hearing about it, but Genshin is one of the most accessible gacha game because it doesn't feel like a mobile game. And it's much more easy to get drawn into. I got drawn into it because I was bored and had the free time, and it's been something I've sunk my time into time and time again. So Genshin Impact, in my opinion, is the best intro to gacha games. But if you're not afraid of trying out mobile games and you don't mind it, I'd actually say you should start with Arknights. Arknights has a beautiful style, it has wonderful music, it has graphics, it's just an amazing style of game, and it's very good with treating you in terms of gacha because you're guaranteed something high in the first 10 rolls. I feel like Arknights is probably, if you're not afraid of gacha, I'd say Arknights first, I'd say Blue Archive, and then Genshin. Even though Genshin has so much to do, the world is arguably so much more of a time sink. So if you're a university student, if you're a high school student, if you have work, I'd say that Arknights and Blue Archive are probably the best. I'd actually say Blue Archive above Arknights simply because Blue Archive allows you to sweep, which saves a ton of time. So the best gacha game overall is probably Arknights. The best gacha game following that would be Genshin and Blue Archive. The content difference in all of them is once you're starting out early game, Genshin feels like it has the most, and then it trails off later on. Once you start out and get to the late game in Arknights and Blue Archive, you still have difficult content like raids, and because of that, they feel much more fleshed out in the end game department. But what are your thoughts? What's the best gacha game to you? My name is Shikai. If you've enjoyed this video, leave a like down below, consider subscribing, joining the Discord server, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.